In the 19th century, factory life was very brutal. The workspace was dark and polluted, and workers had very loose clothing that could get caught in the machines. Factory owners had a high demand for children. The children that worked in the factories tended to only work because they were poor. Usually, if the children were brought up in a middle class, they would be staying at home and going to school. The children in the lower classes would have to go to the factories and work there. They were given very little time to eat. The first main reason for them to be employed is that they could easily be replaced if accidents occurred. Many of the children that they got were from orphanages. The second reason is that they were cheaper to pay than adults. Sometimes the kids didn't even get paid. They were also employed because they were small enough to crawl under machines that needed fixing. In the picture above, the kids have to be taking out items from the machines. There are coils that are right outside the machines, so it is easy for them to get cut. Women tended to stay at home if the men in the family made enough money. If the family was poor, the women would also have to work full-time. Factory owners would employ women because they would be cheaper to pay. Men working at the factories would be paid more than the women and children. In the picture below, you can see almost everyone in this picture is all women. There was a high demand to have them. The Luddites were 19th century textile artisans who protested against newly developed labor-replacing machinery. They went into factories and started to smash up the new machinery in hopes that they would no longer have to work. You can see in this picture that they are using sledgehammers to break the machine. The leaders in the groups lost their job due to government suppressing their many protests. In the poorhouses, women and men were split up with no communication. If the workers did not comply with what they were told, they may have to suffer physical punishments. The families that live there are usually lower class families, hence the name poorhouse. The households tended to have whole families, sometimes even putting multiple families into one room, as seen in this picture right here. You can see the little kid in the woman's arms is very sick, and a lot of the people got many diseases. Charles Dickens was a very famous writer. He could relate to the factory workers because he also had to work in the factories when he was young, specifically a shoeblacking factory. One of his most famous novels, Oliver Twist, showed how difficult it was to live and work during the Industrial Revolution. Hard Times was also based off the Industrial Revolution and the hard times that people went through. The Chartists were the working class of the Industrial Revolution. They drafted the People's Charter, which they showed to the members of Parliament. They asked for votes for all men, equal electoral districts, annual elections, a secret ballot, and better payment. The House of Commons rejected this by a vote of 235 to 46. Many of the leaders of this group of Chartists were arrested for their protesting. In the picture on the right, you can see many Chartists gathered together protesting. There were multiple economic policies that emerged because of this time period. One of them was that the agriculture became more technologically advanced. Capitalism emerged and investments grew in factories. The advancements in technology has helped change the world for the better.
This presentation has been brought to you by VBOW. Okay, the different levels of the middle class were the upper, the solid, and the lower. The upper part of the middle class was more of the industrialists and the banking families. That is why I put the banking picture. And then the solid class was the business professionals, engineers, doctors, and lawyers. They were not too extremely wealthy like the upper class were, but they weren't extremely poor. They were kind of very comfortable where they were. The lower part of the middle class was the small traders, shopkeepers, and the manufacturers. and they just, yeah, they did jobs and stuff. And then this was like common day, like modern day small shop, and it obviously wasn't like that, but it looked similar. What the people did for leisure was more sports increased, such as like soccer, and the blood sports decreased. So that was obviously good. And one of their favorite things to do was drink alcohol, which was, I don't know, never had alcohol before, but I guess they enjoyed that. Fewer children were born because the parents were out working, but the toys that they had, like, they promoted education, which is good for that because more people learned and, yeah, they just learned and stuff, which is very good. And then, so that means the education rates went up. The women in the Industrial Revolution, they didn't have more rights, but like choosing love and stuff, like who they want to marry, was like they got to marry more who they liked than just like an arranged marriage, even though some of them still had to do that. But the women, they married younger while the men married older, and the men kind of weren't faithful, like they had many affairs with other people, which was not good. The women had to be like very poised and stuff and be very faithful, but the men didn't have to do that. Prostitution was very, very, very common for women because they had to make money somehow. So they would sell themselves to men, and it was honestly, yeah, it was very common. The aristocracy controlled most of the wealth in their country. They were like the very upper class, and they kind of looked down on the entrepreneurs. But throughout time, the middle class kind of grew and grew and grew. So the aristocracy dropped because the middle class grew. The population really, really skyrocketed, super high. The human population in the mid 1700s went from 57% to 700%. So that was a lot. Thank you for watching. I'm all done now. Uh-oh. Gosh darn it. Oh.